Hello, Tom LaVecchia here with the New Theory podcast. And this is a first today. We are having Jordan Kessner on. And the reason why this is a first, because we are roughly 60 some odd podcasts deep. And this is the first time we had a person on the show a second time. There's a reason why we're having Jordan on again. Him and I were chatting the other day, and we were talking about three mistakes or main mistakes that entrepreneurs make when raising money. Full transparency, Jordan is in the midst of a capital raise. He has learned a lot by doing so, but the nice thing is he's currently in the foxhole, not in an ivory tower. So today's topic of the New Theory podcast will be three mistakes made by entrepreneurs when raising money. Jordan Kessner, welcome back to the show. How you doing?
Thank you, Tom. I'm doing great. It's good to be back,
All
ready
right.
to rock this.
Now, Jordan is with Stealth Communications. He's the founder and CEO. And again, he's currently in a money raise. And he's about to get some big things happening. But there's been some bumps and bruises on the way. That is the focus of the show. So, first, give us number one. The number one issue or challenge or mistake you made when raising money was what?
Probably asking too much out of the get-go, which a lot kind of threw some investors off just because we were focused on maybe too many markets at one time, which would have allowed us to be able to streamline some things a little bit faster had we focused on one market.
Okay, so I know you're working on a project that's going to help people in a chaotic environment, and you and I talked. So there's probably four or five pillars. So would you say mistake number one is focus on the main market and then sell investors on that main market, and then maybe have it as a backup plan, a peripheral plan, rather than say, hey, we can do this, this, and this. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I would say that it allows you to pivot. So you can pivot at a certain point in time if you have any type of unforeseen barriers, or you can be vetting, your investor particularly and see what markets that they work in, and then target that specific sector of what you're doing.
Now, is it fair that you lost a check singularly because of that, or was it a compilation of issues?
Kind of, probably a combination, but that's probably one of the main things that's thrown them off. Just because they're like they would love the idea, but then feel like that we may not be extremely focused on one particular thing, even though that it's fully adaptable. But that's something that we could you can turn into in later versions as opposed to focusing out of the market. So I would say the best suggestion would be to focus on low hanging fruit. So like something that's right in front of you that you can tangibly take a hold of and then move from there up the tree.
Okay, that makes sense. So folks, number one, if you're entrepreneurs listening, looking to raise capital, focus in on one main vertical. It doesn't even need to be the biggest vertical. It could be a niche, but be focused on that industry or vertical, and then that's where we're going to sell in. Now, if some reason it doesn't work out, we can pivot. Here are some ancillary areas, but don't put them in your primary pitch. Okay, number two.
I would say back to the not vetting that well to begin with, like basically trying to shotgun the industry as opposed to snipering certain types of investors. And then the same situation with regards to potential partnerships, whether it's employees or partnerships with companies, just to make sure that everything's in place accordingly and that the people that you hire are going to work as hard for you as you work for yourself.
Okay, now not to exploit some pain, but without leaving, you can leave some names out because we don't need to get sued. Give us an example or two of some pain you by either not betting a potential partner early on, or maybe not betting an investor.
Well, with the partners, sometimes let's see. I've had a certain situation where I feel like that I made a partnership a little too soon, and the person doesn't necessarily didn't work as hard for the company as they should have, and then at that point, it slowed down our entire growth. Due to expectations of that partnership, and that is a killer to a team.
Okay, so let's first talk about partnerships early on, everybody's your friend. People, it's like Oprah. You get equity. You get equity. People hand out equity like it's candy. So what advice can you? So rule number one is focusing on your niche, right? Number two is the person's looking to raise money right now, and everybody has a friend. Hey, sign me on as a CTO. Sign me on as a CFO. I can get us money. I can do this. I can do that. But sign me on, right? What
Yes.
advice do you have that you can give to newer people that are raising money now, newer entrepreneurs? What specific advice can you give to maybe save them some heartaches? Is it maybe a better contract? Maybe say no. What specific advice do you have for rule number two?
Um, the contract is dependable. I guess that means who's making that. But I definitely would put in there that there are certain expectations that need to be met, and if they're not, that the contract could become void at that point. The legality behind that needs to be firm, so you need to find that out. But I would suggest that you vet very well, because you're going to get into a relationship where you're married, and that is a business marriage is a very stressful situation if it's not handled accordingly. So that's something that you need to make sure that you got that synergy within your company to keep the energy in the right place.
All right, so you talk about vetting potential, partners, vendors, etc. That makes sense. Again, it's something that you may think, oh, you should know that. We've all made those mistakes. Everybody comes and talks a great game. I would also stay away from a lot of contingencies. Hey, I know this one, and I can get you money. Well, great. Well, why don't we go ahead and get that money, and then once the money's in, then we can hire you and do the kind of reverse contingency. What about? I want to stick with two for a second. What about betting investors? Because again, I've dealt with people in the past, and you probably have as well. Who said, "Hey, I got a whole boatload of money," and then it come time to cut the check, and then I find out, they're bankrupt or broke or whatever. So, what's a better way to maybe vet investors when doing a raise?
Well, definitely do your research, and then as far as pitching to investors with regards to doing your research, it allows you to take that 30,000 foot picture and narrow it down to a particular market or area in which this investor may be residing, and then that makes it easy and more tangible for them to want to get involved. Even though you know that you can do something bigger and better, that's something that's basically within the innovation part of it in your mind. And so you need to hold that in while you're focusing on a sniper related target that is directly involved with your investor. As far as if they have money or not, that is definitely something that you want to take into consideration and then try to get a VOD or a validation of deposit once you start to talk to that level.
Now, what exactly is walk us through that for because again, I believe going to appeal to more the novice. So give us an example of what that is, and so our listeners can understand.
As far as the validation of deposit?
Yeah, what exactly is that?
So that's just something where basically if you have around, say, $750,000 like we do currently, you would want to have, the investor needs to be accredited. So if they're not an accredited investor, that can actually get you in trouble with the SEC. So you got to be very careful with that as well. Certain friends and family, there's certain stipulations where you can get by that. But as far as once you get to a corporate level, you got to be careful on who's investing. So make sure you vet that out. A lot of times, get your lawyers involved, and they can start doing the dirty work. So you don't have to be the bad guy asking these type of questions. I actually feel like you're probably better off getting a lawyer to do it, because they can be kind of the full side of it where you can avoid that.
Yeah, because let's be honest, we're almost talking about, hey, let's go ahead and let's talk about money. But if we don't know if they have it up front, now would a serious investor balk? Because if you ask me, hey, I wouldn't be offended, right? If I had a proof of funds or some type of accreditation. Do vendors often balk when you ask that? Or let me rephrase it. Is it a red flag if you ask for some type of accreditation if they say no?
Well, I guess that's where you got to time it on whether or not you want to jump the gun and ask for that type of thing, or if you want to get your lawyers involved. If the lawyers get involved, that's out of your hands. That's something where I didn't know they're going to ask that. That's something
Got it.
that, that there you have that back plate so that it's not necessarily an offensive question that could taint the relationship between you two. But yeah, that's a very hard question. You really have to read your investor. I feel like I was a server, so I read people very well as far as tables and things like that. So it just made it easier for me to kind of get the feeling of the atmosphere, and then in which I can approach that in a given way. But that might be hard to do for some people.
Okay, and now what's the third? Let's round this out. So to summarize, hey, let's go ahead and be focused. Number two, let's make sure if you're going to sign in as a partner, a vendor, or equity, really vet that and try not to give up too much too soon. And then what's a third mistake you would say made by new entrepreneurs?
I learned from it, but I actually think that probably building a team, so which kind of gets onto the vetting situation, but building a strategic team and getting certain positions that you need to fill as if you're a coach. You're the quarterback, but you got to get the players around you, and you need them to be some of the best in their field. So you got to do a lot of vetting behind that and really process it. And so then that way you don't approach certain level investors too soon, because then if you don't have the team to back you to actually achieve the goals, they're more reluctant to actually invest. Whereas if you have a good team, then at that point you could, even if you didn't specifically achieve your goal, you're going to achieve a lot more, or you may even make a different product that then their money is being utilized and it's not wasted.
Wait, but tighten this up a little bit. What do you mean? Like so have a tighter use of proceeds
And a
or
pitch. You could do a really good pitch, and then you want to build your pitch deck, and you want to build use that to not say too much. Give a good overview of your product without going into too much detail, but also make sure you focus on your market, and then that way you have good numbers in place and things like that. And then bring on people on your team on positions and things that you can't do. You may have the best idea, but if you can't actually fill that position, then that becomes hard. So then you can put that within your pitch deck, that allows you to grab more attention. So you're going to be able to throw out better bait for your sharks, basically.
Okay, so I want to tighten this up a little bit. Is it fair to say? That one is maybe not give away too much information too soon because people may steal your idea? I want to nail down.
That's definitely a place, but you also got to be. I think you have to be vulnerable at the same time. You don't want to be too vulnerable and give away all of your secret sauce, but you got to catch their attention enough too. And then showing vulnerability and being able to do that this type of business age is going to mass communication and things like that makes things move a lot faster. So you got to be prepared for that with your market. And if you're not willing to communicate your product very well because you're afraid someone's going to steal it, someone's probably just going to create it. So you got to be very careful with that. And I think that there's a fine line you have to walk between vulnerability and protection.
Okay, so let's summarize. One, be focused. Number two, vet your vendors. Number three, do not give too much information too soon for various reasons. One of which your idea may be stolen. And let's add some subsets in there. One is have an NDA signed at all times, a non-compete NDA. So, have a standard. So somebody, you do present and something happens, you have some financial recourse. And then number two is, I think we talked about this offline, don't ask for too much money. A lot of times people ask for a lot of money. And it's either off-putting, or if they kind of do some due diligence and you're asking for, let's say, $1 million and it can be done for $200,000, you're going to lose confidence in that particular investor, even like an angel investor who may be a little bit more lax and buy into the idea. But I agree. How about in terms of capital raising specifically? How do you feel about that first dollar in? Do you like to hit an angel up? Do you like to do friends and family? Do you like to bootstrap to create value? What do you recommend right out of the gate?
Well, I recommend bootstrapping to begin with, and definitely if you can get friends and family that are like that want to be involved, that's always amazing because it helps you a little bit. But the value of bootstrapping makes you extremely resourceful. And once you become extremely resourceful and you start grinding every day and making connections and doing things like that, that allow you to utilize the money once you do bring it in much more wisely and much more tangible. So you're actually going to get more bang for your buck for your investor that way. And so it's almost like an Elon Musk approach to the market, where he would rather produce a solid product and then not even do a whole lot of crazy marketing based situation until the product is where it needs to be. And then that way, at that point, he's already building credibility because people want to do stories about him, not because he has to do stories about it, if that makes sense. And that's just because it builds a market interest in it because you have a good quality product. So in that scenario, you want to do things in silence and in the dark because they can't hit what they can't see. And so if they can't hit what they can't see, you're going to have an advantage once you get to the level ready for investors.
That makes perfect sense. And then, all right, why don't you give us a quick update? How are you doing with your investment on Stealth?
Yeah, since I last was on here, we have 3 potential investors at 750,000. If we close, that situation will be market ready within 6 months. So there's still people on the table. We still have the open door too, because until there's a BOD and there's money in the bank, there's still chips on the table. So we can still have investors come on if someone's interested after they hear this podcast. But once we get that situation in place, we'll be able to move into all 3 verticals, which would be like private security and military are kind of together, along with like police officers, and then first responders with regards to medical field, and then get into hospitals, and then as well as working on refining our sport communication. That way, once the sports are more open to wearables, we'll be able to tackle that market immediately.
I love it. I love it. That's Jordan Kessner of Stealth Communications. I like the fact that he's actively in the foxhole trying to raise money, and he came on out of his busy schedule to give the pitfalls and mistakes made by entrepreneurs when raising money. And hopefully those who listen to this podcast can listen and learn from Jordan. Jordan, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, sir.
All right, brother. That was great. Now, you threw me off a little bit because the third one was...
I forgot which one it was.
Yeah, I love it. You're my guy, but you know what I wrote?